Okay, so Dr. Amy Albright, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Stephanie. So good to be here with you.
I am very excited to have you here. My audience knows that I love talking about how science intertwines with spirituality, and our society has really kept those very separate, in two different buckets. And there's this movement now, and I mean, really, you're a part of it, that's sort of merging the two and talking about it openly. And so I kind of wanted to get the background. Were you always into both spirituality and science, or did you start in like the scientific realm and then throughout your work move into spirituality? How did that all come about?
Yeah, so when I was in my first year of my undergrad, I was a decidedly devout atheist. And I was studying neurosciences because I felt like if we could understand neurotransmitters, which a lot of the focus was on neurotransmitters in that era, that we could understand the human reality and really be able to make a difference. And I was always in that way, wanting to understand, let's say, the human reality, right? Not just kind of like what happens in a laboratory, but how is it that we experience life? So, in my own atheist ways, that was a consciousness perspective because I was curious about the frame of how we live, how we see, what we believe is real. And basically, at the age of 18, it's very unexpected to have a massive spiritual awakening when you're a devout atheist,
Right?
but that's what happened. And it was a God moment, is maybe the only way to describe it, meaning that it was something so much bigger than me. It was kind of the equivalent of like a full psychedelic journey without any meds or without any substances. It was like the equivalent of somebody having all of the emotionality of the holding their baby, like the moment that they give birth and put their baby to their chest for the first time. But I didn't expect it. So it was very, very, very powerful in that regard. And it was in that moment that I knew that science could not explain everything, not everything that I was experiencing, nor everything that exists in reality ever. Like not like right now, but ever. And that I knew that there was a God. And I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that there was a God. And so it was at that moment that I started to weave together both, and I shifted from more of a neurology strict kind of perspective in my focus academically to cognitive psychology, really understanding how the brain impacts behavior and our perception of the world. And I also started to study indigenous ways of being. And so I was studying at university, academically, shamanism, rites of passage, indigenous ways of being. How did we used to live? And I became very fascinated. I mean, I've always been a very curious person, but I became extremely fascinated with the ways of sacred and how do we honor that and what are the universals? Because I'm not somebody that's going to shift into a faith-based model that is church-based per se. I was more interested in studying what have always been true, even for cultures and communities and peoples that never had the opportunity to know each other. And I felt like that's where I could find those deeper truths. So I kept those both going academically throughout my undergrad. And I basically haven't stopped. I mean, this was 30 plus years ago. I had that spiritual awakening 32 years ago.
And was it completely spontaneous, or was there an event or something that happened to you to have that awakening? Or it's just like one day you just, boom, it hits
It's
you.
yeah, it seemed kind of ordinary. I was receiving my first ever acupuncture session, which is a pretty,
Yeah.
that's not, by the way, why I became later a doctor of Chinese medicine. That's a completely separate whole thing. I mean, certainly Chinese medicine had had a huge impact on me, and not just in that moment, but also in the recovering of my health from the way that modern science and modern medicine had addressed my health issues as a child and as a young adult.
Mhm.
So yeah, but I was just receiving acupuncture, and it was like I was levitating and I was sinking and I was hearing guides' voices and I was tracing out meridians and I'm not saying I was actually, by the way, levitating or sinking, but it was the feeling, right? Like
Yeah.
it was a complete transcendent altered reality that occurred,
Yeah.
that wasn't a part of my worldview. I wasn't seeking that. I actually showed up kind of a cynic even to the acupuncture. Like, yeah, probably nothing's going to get me better, but what's a few more needles after I've been poked and prodded and been this kind of, chewed up and spit out by the medical community. I'll try something new, I guess.
Right,
So it
right.
wasn't like I was going in so optimistic, even with what that would be.
Yeah. Well, I had a similar upbringing in that I wasn't religious. We didn't go to church or anything like that. And kind of a similar experience in my early 20s where it just sort of hit me that
Mm,
there's so much more than we understand or that we can see. And later, as I started diving into the science, just wanting to understand like what is happening with, manifesting and what is the science behind it and the neuroscience, what's happening in our brain. And that's when it really hit me that I feel like in the scientific world, we're missing such a big part of the equation, which I think is consciousness. Like, why aren't we
yeah.
talking about this? And what is this and what does it mean?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, being that I mean, you have such a huge background in not only science, but Chinese medicine and shamanism and all these things. How would you define consciousness or and has your view changed in the work that you're doing now with it?
Yeah. It's a huge question. And so I'll start with answering this piece first, which is anything that I say out loud is automatically not what consciousness is, because it's like trying to create not only a quantity for the concept of infinity by naming it, but also to try to conceptualize something that is too vast to be understood ever,
Yeah.
right? So I say it with that humility, and I'm honored by the question, and I've been honoring the question myself my whole adulthood. It is really my life's work. I would say that consciousness, if I could distill it down, is awareness. And it's not awareness of just self, inside of, because we know that we lie to ourselves and have misperceptions all the time. Not just in a bad way, but like if we don't believe that something is there, we might walk right past it and not see it, right? So there's omissions in our perception, and there's distortions in our perception, and then there's accuracies within our perception. So, but that's just within the human experience. But the awareness that I'm describing is actually the multidimensional, multifactorial, one presence consciousness,
Mhm.
right? So our ability as an individual cell within the totality of all of existence to receive and give and signal information, with awareness.
Ugh, what a beautiful explanation. And you know what? You're right, though. It's like it's such a vast concept. It's like no words are going to do it justice, really.
Mhm.
But I know you do a lot with neuroscience, right? And
Mhm.
you have, your technology, which we'll get into all of that. Um, but we're at a point now where like we know it's consciousness isn't just a function of the brain, right? It's like
Right.
is that still going on in the scientific community, or has it
Yeah.
started sort of opened up to like, okay, there's something bigger going on that we don't quite understand?
Yeah, I think that it's starting slowly to shift from outright denial of the topic itself to a topic that should be addressed, but it's in its infancy of being addressed, which is really interesting in my kind of, I can't say that I sit at the heart of academic rigor. I'm not sitting at a research university like I did in my undergrad. I was preparing to be a professor for the rest of my life in my undergrad. But I would say that just the observation from kind of watching how studies are happening, there was a conference early this year or late last year, not very long ago, at Harvard that was maybe the first of its kind to just focus on the exploration of what is consciousness and how does that relate to the brain. And a bunch of neuroscientists that are tenured professors at Harvard and Oxford and places like that showed up to have that conversation. And each of them had been engaged in that conversation, but they're the very few within the total sum, because we still live inside of a reductionist model that says that we are not connected to things, and we live or the separatist model, and it's the materialist model, right? So that which we can touch is real. So neurotransmitters and neurons are real, and all of the rest of this is a figment of our imagination. But there's just so many things that we can't explain. so many phenomenon that have been documented and are not being taken seriously inside of medical literature, maybe in any domain, right? Spontaneous healings of those who are ill, or it could be, these transcendental states that are occurring, or there's some studies, of course, being done inside of the space of like, well, what does it mean to be an amazing meditator? And then they study that, but it's not necessarily studying what this is like as a learning and growth process. So it's a snapshot of somebody that's got X number of decades or certain kinds of meditation practice, for instance, and they're not really interested academically in how to actually change what the human capacity, what a particular human's capacity is. It's just kind of like documenting weird phenomenon
Hmm.
is where a lot of the field is at, it seems
Yeah.
like.
That's why I was
Yeah.
so excited to have you on because there's so few people that I come across that really are willing to like look at this and to, that are into science, but also very open, to possibility. And I just, looking at everything, I'm like, why are we not putting so much of our resources and money to like understanding this more? Like it just absolutely blows my mind.
Hmm.
I don't know if you ever listened to the telepathy tapes, but
Hmm.
I saw they had a new season and there was a neurosurgeon that had a near-death experience. And he's like, once I woke up, I was looking at my brain scans and there's no way, absolutely no way this could have been a dream. Like there was no activity going on in the brain,
Right.
but he had had this incredible,
Right.
very, real experience. And I get goosebumps just hearing about it, but it's like just blows my mind. Like, how can we deny this? I feel like everyone has that inner knowing that there's something more than what meets the eye, but
Right.
I'm just glad that there's people like you that are out there and you're doing a lot of work with it. You're paving the way to where I think we'll be there in my lifetime, hopefully, where someday it's like everyone will be like, oh yeah, of course, consciousness doesn't come from the brain and this is, but it's just such an uphill battle, it seems like. Have you dealt with that like in what you're doing with your work? Do you get a lot of pushback or you've just kind of removed yourself from that?
I just only talk with the people that are open. I'm not here to change a lot of closed-minded folk. We can all block the most beautiful blessings from the divine. We can all block what is true. And I like to work with people who want some gentle encouragement in the right direction or to be fortified in their sense of knowing of this being true. Clinically, it's very difficult to take a skeptic non-believer that's basically
Yeah.
got their arms crossed across their chest and they're trying to disprove everything. It's not as much fun. There's plenty of people that are ready. So, but I would say that, overall, that in that community that you're pointing to and why are we not, there could be a lot of reasons put towards that. But I think one of them is that it makes people very uncomfortable to note that we're not in control.
Hmm. Right.
Right. It's kind of like, well, if there's some other intelligence or if we're all connected, like it kind of gets at the root and the foundation of our modern society. And it starts to erode the belief structures that we think are holding us safe, which are not. And that's why we're at where we're at right now as a collective. We are not separate. And if we pretend that we are based on invisible lines drawn on land or nationalities or whatever it is, that's the root of a lot of the pain and discomfort that we are having as a collective is that we've extracted and exploited. And the only reason that you could do that is, you mean, perhaps it could be said a lack of compassion or a lower consciousness or vibration. But another one is just the fundamental belief structure that there's something to extract that's outside of ourselves, like that we're not harming ourselves in that way.
Hmm.
So, in addition to being a doctor of Chinese medicine and doing this work in neurosciences, I've also done a lot of advising over into businesses. And I've done basically a living laboratory over there to prove out that we definitely not only make more money and have more resilient companies when we behave in non-extractive and non-exploitive ways, but that we actually we're a part of the fabric of change because this is a major inflection point for planet Earth, right? Like, do we face extinction right now? I don't know, maybe. Do we face definitely like or there's definitely the possibility of a reinvention.
Yeah.
essentially. And so I feel like that this conversation needs to be made more serious, needs to be understood at a different level, because a lot of people, they think that when we get into anything that's not proven out by hard science, that we're out in the land of woo and that that's dangerous. And I would like to just say that as somebody who's been studying medical literature and since for 32 years, that it's science is being driven by a lot of people who sometimes can't see past their own nose. And we're studying things for political reasons, and denying other things. And whether that's just because big pharma can't figure out how to make their millions and billions of dollars on a particular thing, if we go that direction, or if it's just not a part of the worldview, right? If it's not a part of our worldview, why would we study it? But our worldview is limited by default because we're humans, but we put the power in science and the power in the scientists who are doing the science as though they are God. Same thing with the MD world. And and that's up to us to take our power back and to ask bigger and deeper questions and to be able to trust what it is that we know even ahead of science, because science is always going to be trailing many decades over. I mean, it's essentially like coming back to my insight that I had at the ripe age of 18. Science will never be able to explain all of it. So I don't say that then in meaning that we should throw away science. I reference scientific literature all week long, but I'm not making decisions based on that alone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's a huge difference in perspective that is really important that we all can hold, whether we're a doctor or, just a health consumer or people that are healthy that are looking to expand their reality. Like we don't need to wait for it to be documented to know what we feel is true inside of ourselves to be able to move forward.
Yeah, and you're right. It is always lagging behind. And I don't know, I feel it. Like, I feel like we have been sort of at this fork in the road, like you were saying, like, is it going to be mass extinction or like this big awakening? And I really believe, like, I think we're moving towards this big awakening. But again, it's like this uphill battle a little bit. And I had gone back at one point in time because I'm like, there people have studied consciousness, and like this was actually, it seemed like it was a little more accepted like 100 years ago or 150 years ago. What happened? And then I saw it was like right around, you know, the World War, and like, okay, we're gonna take our resources and we're gonna fund scientific studies on, you know, superconductors, like things that we can use for our military or for our economy, which, you know, okay, but then it just seemed like that's when a lot of like the almost like shaming came in. If you were in the scientific community and you dare talk about anything spiritual or having to do with consciousness. And
Yeah.
it's just such a shame, but I think we're getting back to that point. I almost feel like technology is
AI
helping.
is going to help in a huge way. It's already
Yes.
helping. So I heard a talk, I forget the guy's name right now, but I heard a talk about UAP from the guy that was the whistleblower in the Pentagon. And he used to
Mhm.
carry a briefcase locked to his wrist with information about, I like to call them star people, whatever we want to refer to it to. But there's craft and there's things going on all the time. And what his comment was is that if there is a campaign to basically poo-poo something at that level that is kind of infiltrated into our society, that we should believe that it's actually real and that we're being gaslit at scale,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because the government doesn't want us to be whatever the beliefs are. I mean, again, it's not so much that I'm a conspiracy theorist because I don't feel like I get into the charge around everything in that way. But I can tell you that a huge change in how medicine was being practiced was when the pharmaceutical companies infiltrated into the studies and training of the doctors, the MDs that were going through school specifically.
Mhm.
And then everything became very much oriented towards pharmaceuticals and surgeries, which also then require more devices and equipment and everything like that, right? Even a surgery has a huge amount of profit in it all the way through the chain. So there's a way in which that there's a, and I'm not saying like, oh, it was done in the spite of evil and like all this stuff, but I can tell you that for the most part, natural medicine doctors are able to pull off far more than is being allowed to be talked about. And that there is a knowing inside of each of us that have really studied, that there's more. And I would say that it's interesting. For our programs, somebody asked me once, we have who we love to work with, but they said, yeah, but what's the most common profession that you get coming through? And then I said, well, I mean, other than if I was to say CEO, founder of some sort of a amazing organization that's here to create a better world in a deep way, like that's definitely a category of who we work with. But if I was going to say a profession, it would be MDs. MDs come through our program because they appreciate the rigor and they appreciate the foundation and the rooting into science and the way that we hold it. But they also, the ones that we work with, are really clear that they ended up signing up for a whole profession that they
Mhm.
don't believe in. It
Yeah.
doesn't match their values. It doesn't match what they thought they were signing up for, or they had an awakening out of the paradigm that they did sign up for and realize that it's something that they can no longer be a part of. So we help a lot of MDs through career transitions for that reason. To be able to employ the information and the knowledge and their intelligence and all of their beautiful heart into a way that is a different application of what they learned. So all of this is right there.
Yeah.
All of like the world is right here, and we don't need to be validated by an external source to follow our intuition. Intuition is our birthright. Intuition is part of our epigenetics. Those are of our ancestors who lived long enough to procreate were the ones that knew where the food was, where the herd had moved to, which herbs to use when somebody was sick, if there was danger. And so that same intuition that we have it's there, and it's just waiting for remembrance and to be trusted. And we live in this time when it's really an amazing era that we can merge some of this rational thought and intellectual information that we have with that intuitive knowing, and make sure that no matter what, we keep our compass, that we don't, a lot of the times I see people give up their power to a system or an individual that exists inside of a system that they believe is hierarchically better suited to make a decision for them, whether
Yeah.
that's the government or their MD or their boss or whatever it is, right? And just for people to be able to claim back that power and be really clear, we're working inside of, and this whole conversation is in essence a conversation of consciousness. So I think that a lot of the times when people think of that word, they think of it maybe in terms of, sit in an ashram and meditate, and that is consciousness. And I would say that is also an exploration into consciousness. But what we're doing right now by elevating our perception, by clarifying, we're not having a lot of charge, we're not doing finger pointing, we're just talking about the isness. And we're elevating ourselves inside of this in such a way that we can become more empowered, which is also a part of consciousness, so that we can then also go out and make real change in our lives and in the world around us, which is also consciousness.
Yeah.
It's not an abstract thing. It's how do we live with awareness, and how do we create more awareness inside of our mind, but inside of our body, inside of all of the aspects of us as we exist inside of the total of the all that is,
Hmm.
right? Us as one cell.
Yeah. Well, the way that I look at it, and I don't know, maybe this is kind of cynical, but like, I just feel like there's so much conditioning in our education system to teach kids from a very young age not to listen to themselves, trust the
Hmm.
authority in the room, and don't tap into that. And like, there's no time to be creative. Like, let's reading, writing, arithmetic, like all that kind of stuff, to where we get to be adults and we might hear that voice or have that feeling, but we don't trust it at
Right.
all. We're
Oh,
looking
it's
to something outside of ourselves. And if we can just kind of teach people how to tap into that, I think everything would change, really. I think the whole world would change. I think everyone's lives would change. And that's one of the things you do, right? Like you can help people sort of become more reacquainted with it, or how do you go about that? I know you have like technology that can measure everything, and I'm just so curious.
Yeah, there's so many facets to it. It's kind of I'll do my best to describe it here, but there's a lot.
Mhm.
So one is this grounded practicality about the game that we're actually inside of. What is this consciousness thing? And how do we work as parents, as, with our jobs? How do we move through life and really have a different architecture and a way of understanding and framing what is reality and what are the possibilities? Because we know that if our perception or awareness and consciousness are limited, that we're not even aware of what we're not aware of,
Hmm.
right? Like
Yeah.
that is the nature of being a human. To some extent, we're always going to have things that are outside of our perceptual awareness. So how do you know that? How do you know that we can't count on these powers outside of us and not even just still feel empowered, but actually feel more empowered by that? And how do we make decisions as a hiring manager or as a parent or whatever it is, all these roles that we might have out in the world in a very grounded and practical way while being informed by the architecture of reality. And so, what I mean by the architecture of reality is the human energy field as it interfaces with the energy field of the all that is, because we are a single cell inside of an energetic frame, which includes our own energy of our neurobiology. Our neurons they're running energy, it's electricity.
Yeah.
Right? The scientists don't use the word energy because that sounds maybe a little on the woo spectrum, but ultimately, our light bulbs are powered by electricity, and that's energy. And our
Hmm.
brains are also, and all of our mitochondria of our body, they're communicating and working with energy. And so to be able to understand how to best care for ourselves is another huge part of the work that we do, because there's a lot of ways to be led astray, even within, like, let's say, natural medicine or what looks like biohacking out there. Some of it's great and some of it's not. And so, what are those foundational pieces and how do we bring ourselves to a place where we're really engaged with the truth of what we need in particular, not what everybody else needs, and really living in alignment in that way. And then I would say that there's also a huge segment again of the work that is having people come on site or working remotely to engage in programs to be able to modify how, especially the brain. There's a lot of emphasis on the brain. The brain regulates down. Everything in the body is downstream to the brain, basically, and then the brain is downstream to the all that is, and also can upregulate and transmit information out into the all that is. So it's a huge area of study and a huge area of focus inside of Holon. And so within that, we can have people, let's say, on site and change how their brain is functioning in real time, not via abstract, or just like binaural beats or something like that, but the most advanced hardware and software applied in the world to change how the brain is functioning so that it learns new behavior. So neurofeedback therapy is a huge class of what it is that we employ here to get that benefit. And neurofeedback therapy is typically used for pathology like depression or schizophrenia or ADHD, and it works for all those things. And we have people come in that have, let's say, they have a little sleep issues or they're prone to a little low grade depression or a little bit of ADHD. But the high functioning folks that we bring through our programs are gearing themselves up to be the change makers that they were born. Like, why did they come here? And how can they see that next part of their path that they can't quite clearly see or be able to implement on that, right? So it can change cognition, it can change focus, but we also can change how somebody is able to perceive reality in a huge way. So they're not perceiving threat when there's no threat, or they're seeing possibility where before they saw threat. So that's a huge one. And then going beyond that, we can help them to tap into their intuition. So we can actually train the brain to improve intuition very specifically. You can also improve intuition and all of the abilities that kind of are lumped in that category, like working with manifestation and kind of everything within that realm, can be improved by taking really good care of our physical health in general,
Hmm.
eating well and doing all the right things. But definitely the brain is like, that's where we take the divine instrument that we are, our body is, and we tune it to the perfect pitch for us so that we become that antenna for the divine, so that we can let grace pour through us as we move through our life and we can feel that sense of peace and joy and freedom that we really desire. So in a lot of the work through all of those modalities, whether it's the strategy aspect of being able to see a template for reality that didn't seem to exist before in our awareness, that also includes being able to be free of one's past in really rapid form. So what's thought to be not healable or not integratable into life. Like a lot of us have walked through severe trauma, or, we're still tending to the inner child decades later. Being able to move through that in such a rapid and really foundationally solid way by addressing all the levels of the being inside of this very, it's like multiple layers of well-crafted strategy and implementation for healing and evolution. Basically, people are getting huge, huge change that is thought to be impossible in their
Yeah.
brain, in their being, everywhere.
I wanted to ask you about that because one of the things that I've seen that kind of rubs me the wrong way, I mean, not that there was a bad intention behind it, but I think in this whole, like, I don't know what you want to say, like healing people that are on like their healing journey, it seems like so much of what's out there is like, let's just revisit this traumatic moment over and
Oh,
over and over
totally.
again. And I'm just thinking,
Totally.
like, okay, so we're focusing on the thing we don't want, like over and
That's
over again. Like,
right.
I don't think that's a good idea. You
Right.
know, and sometimes I get flack from that, but I just don't. I don't feel like that's necessarily something we should do. And so you're saying like that's not necessary. This can be done quickly. You're just using a
Mhm.
different approach than
It
going back and
is.
revisiting this over and over.
Yeah, I mean, I think that essentially we're still quite antiquated in our ways of approach on this. There's the psychotherapeutic model that maybe was trending in the 1950s that were some iteration improved over. I'm not saying there's been no real improvement, but we're still inside of a pathology model that says you'll always be broken and you'll maybe get incrementally better. And so we need to really revisit the ways that you're not okay.
Mm. Yeah.
And then that makes you maybe marginally better because you start to release some pain or shame. But the thing is that it does really also negatively reinforce because it's low technology. Basically, it's outdated.
Hmm.
And I think that it's time to be able to strike the balance. And that's what I feel like we're doing, we're striving inside of. There's always improvement within our practices and our ways. But I really want to take a stand for, and it's not just hold on. There's a movement that's beginning that's saying, what is that balance point? Because we don't want to live in denial. I'm not about let's paint a coat of happy and pretend everything is okay and just push all of this stuff away. It exists in our neurology. The trauma still exists in our neurology. We can see it on the EEG data that we're looking at in our laboratory,
Okay.
right? We know if somebody's got trauma. They're like, no, no, I'm fine. I talked all that stuff through, or I did 37 ayahuascas or whatever their story is. And I'm like, great, but it's still there, right? Like, I'm glad that you feel better, but your brain in this case is still suffering in PTSD,
Hmm.
or whatever. So being able to be really real because we know that it's there inside of our energy bodies. It's there. We can suppress and we can repress things and try to work around them. And we do work around them really well. We're incredible at that as beings overall.
Hmm.
But the thing is that it always has a price. So we're not just repressing the things that we don't want to look at. We're repressing more than that. We're repressing the amount of joy and possibility that we're bringing in every moment if we are repressing, something like that. So how do we strike that balance where we're efficient? Let's say, let's get in and get that stuff cleared with really ambitious goals and with really complete and very, very structurally sound strategies so that we can get it done rather than rinse and repeat, but also build the understanding of what it is that we're really doing. And that's one of the things that I've really learned. I've been a clinician for 23 years, and I've learned that people have to have somewhere to go to if they're going to let go of the broken identity or the person who dealt with such and such trauma or whatever their identity structure is. They need to have a place to go. They need to have a thing that they know that they're growing into. We don't want to just ask people to let go into, then who am I, right? Even
Right.
if we
And then
know
you
we don't
feel
want that
lost.
suffering.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our psyche is wired to have a sense of self. And so we want to create that sense of self instead of what is healthy and then get really efficient at the strategy of releasing so that we're not in denial, but we're not also perpetuating suffering. And I think to go to your point, I think that that's something that's also not talked about.
Oh, absolutely. I'm thinking like what synchronicity, because literally 2 nights ago I was talking to my husband about ayahuasca. You had mentioned ayahuasca, and like you hear these things about that or like psilocybin, and I'm like, you know what? If I didn't have little kids, I'd be on a plane, I would try this stuff. Like I'm so curious. I like you hear about these incredible healing stories, but you're saying we don't have to do that. Like you don't have to go on a psychedelic trip in order to have this level of healing or, movement. You can do
Yeah,
this in other ways, which is very,
correct.
I am interested. I am very
Okay.
interested.
Good. I mean, I think that this whole field and this approach are not known about, and it's coming forward now at this moment in history, maybe when we need it more than ever. Just to be clear, I am pro psychedelics. I'm not trying to talk down on that either, but I think
Yeah.
that there are some people like you, for whatever reason, it's not resonating right now. There
Hmm.
are some people that it will never be appropriate for. By the way, I'm not recommending psychedelics for the listeners, or I'm not even recommending anything that I'm doing. I'm just sharing about it. But I've seen the incredible results that people can get. But I
Yeah.
also, within the folks that are going that route, they often start to get to the place of law of diminishing returns. So the
Mm.
first time they go, it's a massive improvement. And then, the further out that they go, the improvements become less remarkable,
Hmm.
is often the case. And so where do we pick up where that leaves off? And I think that that's a lot of what we have to offer as well. So for those that it doesn't resonate to go that way, but they want the big change, or for those that they feel like they're getting less change, that's it's huge, because with neurofeedback therapy, we're making extremely precise measurements of the brain in real time, and we're feeding information back to the brain. So there are sensors on the scalp that go into the computer and feed information back to the brain faster than the mind can perceive.
Oh, wow.
And we're changing how the brain functions in, let's say, literally thousands, potentially thousands of different ways. We may focus in so that it can learn what the heck is going on in a certain moment. Like, let's say we want you to be less anxious, brain, and we're giving you the message. We're not allowing the brain to go down the route of being anxious, feeling anxious. Well, what ends up happening is that the person either hears or sees, or both, some kind of a cue that tells them if they're moving away from anxiousness. And the brain is rerouting that information in real time, again, faster than the mind can perceive. It's understanding those cues, because that's the way reality works. Our brain is faster than our mind.
Hmm.
And so we shape the brain's behavior, because if it's going towards those anxious feelings and thoughts and patterns neurologically again, it's being perceived within 40 milliseconds back to the brain that the brain is headed the wrong way,
Wow.
right? So it's really, really fast. And the brain says, oh, wait a minute, I want to see the thing on the screen. It's like playing video games with just your brain. It's
Yeah.
amazing, right? So I want to see the thing on the screen, or I want to hear that sound if I'm doing an eyes closed training that tells the brain wants to know that it's on the right track. And it'll continue to reroute that information until it's performing in the way that doesn't have anxiety or doesn't have that anxious feeling. And if you do that for long enough, the brain realizes that that's a superior method of behavior, right? Like, who really wants anxiety? Our bodies want homeostasis. They want us to be free, but it just needed some help getting pointed in that direction. And then if you do it often enough, then the brain rewires in that direction. And it's a very specific signal, because there's, let's say, within the topic of being anxious, there might be, I mean, this is probably an under exaggeration, but let's say there's like maybe 10 top ways to get there. So we can't just go based on symptomology alone. We have to understand what's happening with the communication and the substructures of the brain. So this is going way beyond the idea of like, oh, it's too much beta. Like people kind of, there's a lot of popular science out right now that's not very accurate about brain medicine and brain understanding.
Hmm.
And so this is a very deeply scientific and very robust picture about what's happening, and then a very targeted treatment towards moving somebody away from those uncomfortable reality, like symptoms of reality, called anxiousness. But likewise, we could be moving them into clearer cognition or better decision making, leadership traits, wisdom, the embodiment of wisdom, like bringing forward who they really are with that same kind of technology.
Okay, so I have to ask you this because I saw on your website it said like new levels of embodied wisdom, peak performance, and supernatural capacities. And I'm like, okay, I have to ask you, what do you mean? I want
I
to
mean,
know.
I mean, what the natural byproduct of people being less neurotic and more connected is that they become more intuitive. So, at the very least, they'll be naturally more intuitive. But we have an understanding of how intuitive brains work, and we can encourage somebody neurologically in those directions. So, it could be clairvoyance, it could be, you know, telepathy, it could be whatever, the ability to channel. All of that stuff is documented, at least in our laboratory. The beginnings of it are in places like Stanford and that, but they don't know how to get people safely there,
Yeah.
right? They know how to measure people who are there, but they don't understand it. If it's like if you want to be able to teach a brain, you have to be able to know how much more. You have to understand the material better to teach it than you are to just name it.
Hmm.
So the material is better understood by those who can implement it. And so we implement those kinds of changes for folks if that's what's appropriate for them, you know.
So if someone is psychic, for example, or has telepathy, do they use different areas of the brain more? Like, is it something you can actually see on your scans?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I speak pretty fluent neurosciences, but I'm not the fullest neuroscientist on the team. The neuroscientists that are really adept at this can look at, oh wow, that amount of gamma in that particular area in the auditory cortex probably means that they can channel and talk to angels, the angelic realm directly. This type of activity in the parietal lobe indicates that they are probably very clairvoyant and or just have a lot of claircognizance, right? So we can see those, this person has the right amount of theta at the right frequency in the right area of the brain. And that means that they are a natural theta healer, even if they don't know that about themselves, right? We've seen people that are like, they've exited big companies and made a ton of money doing something completely unrelated to healing. And we look at their brain and we're like, wow, you are a really gifted healer. And there's a little bit of a like, wait, who, me? And then I show them because I can teach those skills. And then they realize that it's true, right?
And
Like
that's what's
they're
so,
experiencing it.
like, that's going to change the world because, again, there's so much conditioning that,
Hmm.
like, my mom, for example, I'm like, you're like psychic. And she's like, no, I'm not, no, I'm not. And there's all this conditioning around, like, well, I don't want to go there necessarily because I don't want to open a door that I can't close. And it's just
Hmm.
stuff like, fearful things that, like, our society puts out there. But if we could tap into them, it's nothing to be afraid of. Like, these are gifts. We have them for a reason. And I think we probably, I mean, you could speak to this more than I can, but I would say we probably are blocking them in a lot of ways just because
Oh,
of the subconscious fear
yeah.
that's we're conditioned with.
Yeah, totally. That fear that's there, the belief structure. Again, we can walk right past something. If we don't think it's there, we won't see it,
Hmm.
right? That is often the case. So people are having, that's how I started. I used to think I just had an overactive imagination, and then it turns out it was massively intuitive, but I didn't put that together until I was done with the majority of my medical training,
Mm, yeah.
right? Because it wasn't what I just didn't believe it could be true for me. I had at that point already believed that it was true in general. But what I found in teaching these kind of skills for over 20 years is that people really think that it's like the cool kids club. That's another one. Oh, that's what other people can do. That's
Right.
so special for
Yep.
them. But
Not
they're not
me.
looking at themselves.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that people are afraid, and I think that's another huge factor. And I think that it's, this world can be already quite a lot in just the 3D kind of level. So if we were to bring in the other realms and other connection points that are there and that can be there as a part of our experienced reality, that it can feel like it's more. I feel like people are safer by having their intuition. They're going to make better choices.
Hmm.
I think that intuition is used by the most successful people in the world, and I have had the privilege of seeing that and supporting those folks. They'll think they made a decision on that merger or acquisition or where to invest funds or how to drive their own business based on data. And I'm like, yeah, but what happened for you when you were looking at that spreadsheet? And then we get
Yes.
down into it and they're like, what was a feeling in my gut? I'm like, yeah, tell me about that. You know what I mean?
I
So
was gonna ask you about that because I know you've worked with so many big people, but I have noticed that, and they won't call it intuition mostly. I mean, some people will, but a lot of times it's like, well, I had this gut feeling. You have to trust your gut. And I'm
mhm.
like, no, they're intuitive. That's probably why they're so successful. They're just
Yeah.
not, they're using a different language to describe it, but it's the same thing.
It is the same. Yeah. And maybe it can be enriched even further that capacity that they have by having a strategy, by
Mhm.
developing it, by having a framework, by we're safer when we've put intentionality behind and around something, into something, rather than just using it. So even for those folks that have it, I encourage them to continue to hone it and work with it. And maybe they can have that more with their kids if it only existed inside a business before. Maybe
Yeah.
they can have that for their life in general. But I think that it's amazing how we code word certain things and the workarounds that
Hmm.
exist inside of our conscious reality, our awareness reality, that are changed when we come into this conversation of consciousness or intuition or what's really going on. Um, yeah, it changes
Well,
everything.
now I feel like I'm going all over the place, but I have so many
Mm-mm.
questions for you. Like, I'm so excited about everything you're talking about. So, you said a couple things. You talked about how our brains are like antennas, which I love because I that's kind of the visual that I always have. Um, and then you talked about like the 3D and how there's these other realms, right? How do you have like a theory on reality itself? Like I'm kind of I fully believe that we're in like some sort of a hologram or something like that. Where do you stand on that? Because I used to think that was completely crazy, but now I feel like the more I learn, the more I'm like, well, this actually seems very possible. Like we see such a small sliver of, reality, quote unquote reality. What's your take on it? Do you have like a theory on if we're in one big game, one big simulation, a
Oh, simulation theory
hologram?
stuff. Yeah.
I mean, what do you think?
Well, I love your word hologram. The word holon, which is the name of my company, is HOLO, is the same as hologram, right?
Oh,
Holon and
okay.
hologram. And so it's speaking to the interconnectedness of all things and how
Mhm.
we are intrinsically a part of, we're a small unit of a greater whole. And
Mhm.
that also we have smaller units within the whole, right? We have cells in our
Yeah.
body, we have organs, we have different aspects that we can identify. So I love that. And I mean, ultimately, I feel like that we are all the same consciousness that's having the capacity to grow and know itself. I don't know. I don't think this is really what simulation theory means, but I think that some people have interpreted that to mean that there's like a guy that's got a video game and we're those multiplayer,
Yeah.
we're
Right.
just like players in his game. I don't think that that's true on a
Yeah,
guy
that's not the way
level.
that I would visualize it,
Exactly.
but I know it's so interesting because within all of this, there's so many like sub theories. Like everyone
Mhm.
perceives it differently. Um, but I don't know. I just feel like we see such a small portion of whatever reality is, and I think just like you're saying, we're tapped in, we're all part of this one greater consciousness, but I think we can tap into it whenever we want, and it's almost like it's almost like we're coding our reality in a way and like pulling from the wisdom of the whole. I don't really, it's hard to put
Yes.
into words, but in
Yes.
my mind it like makes
It
sense when I
is.
think about
Well,
it.
and it's a part of the word. It's the same thing as the word consciousness, the way that we were describing it. It's really
Mhm.
the same conversation. It's all the same thing. And I would describe it in the same way that it's an impossibility to describe. It's an
Yeah.
impossibility that we could ever fully define it. If we think we've defined it, we need to start over. Just like if we think that we're enlightened, we probably need to start over. If we think we don't have more to learn, then that's a very it's a non-humble and non-true reality because there is no construct for infinite capacity, infinite knowledge, infinite life beyond, or structures beyond planet Earth. Like it's just, let's be really humble inside of it, I think is important.
Mhm.
And also stand strong inside of what we know. So what I would say that we know is that we will perform better if we can hold that truth in a way in our body that does not cause any fear when we're excited by it or we feel neutral about it.
Mm.
Right? Because then what we're doing is we're allowing for the tendrils of our energy body, for the neurons in our brain to be able to expand outward and receive new signals and have new patterns. And so inside of that, then it's kind of endless possibilities. I think that there's, it's funny because it's like being somebody that teaches, like I have a wisdom school that I teach, which is how to work with energetics and creation and manifestation, but also how to understand it in terms of 3D practicality and how does our brain work and how are we setting ourselves up for all of this. So I would say that even though I've been teaching that for a while, I've been teaching on intuition, I've been in this for so long, and it's like, look, ultimately, we can only know what we can know, right? It is a finite amount of the total because it's an infinite amount.
Hmm.
And so, inside of that, the best thing that we can do is find our footing inside of ourselves and then always be reaching out, always open, always growing, always curious about what's possible and playing out into what is possible. I like to focus on creating and co-creating miracles because I feel like that has me working this edge that I'm describing.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of how I shaped my career and my work in my own self in my life. Like, how do I not just accept the what is, but feel into the what's possible and know that if I shift my perception of reality, if I up level my consciousness or my awareness, that I can then have access to an infinite amount of power and energy and information and capacity that doesn't make any logical sense at this level of consciousness, but it makes perfect sense at that next iteration. And so I do that in such a way where it's like, I do no harm, first do no harm, like the Hippocratic Oath as a doctor. I'm not going to do anything that's risky for people, but inside of what is safe, why would I not go for what is possible?
Yeah, I like that. I love it because I feel like you really embrace, a lot of these ancient practices. Like I'm always saying, like, we need to just throw out a lot of what we learned in the last 50 years or so and go back to like what our great, 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 great grandparents did in terms of health and things like that.
Yeah.
But you bring in the technology as well. And I don't know, I just think it's really interesting because I hear a lot of fear around where technology is headed or a lot of negativity. Like it's so bad, we're always on our phones, which, like, that's true. We are always on our phones. But I think it's what we're doing with it. And what you're
Hmm.
doing with it is, I mean, that this is just completely like next level. I mean, people can tap into what they've always had, they just have blocked or ignored or whatever for any reason. And I think the more you do that within you, your external world will start to change. But it all starts with us internally. Like that's where
Absolutely.
we can make the biggest impact is just like getting to a good place within, I think.
Hmm. Hmm. And remaining clear that we are always in choice.
Mm, yeah.
Right? If we know that we're always in choice when we see an aspect of reality inside of us or around us that we don't prefer, then we're engaged in being open to solutions and we're finding them and we're not in victim, right? And it's okay if we have a victim to clear, like that's a thing, that's a project to work on, no problem. But if we can live inside of that place of choice, then we're it's a growth mindset, but it's one that is much more naturally collaborative if we believe and understand that we are interconnected. Oh wait, I don't have the solution to this. Oh wait, this is an unpleasant reality. Oh right, I have choice right now. I can continue to suffer,
Mhm.
or I can up level my perceptual awareness intentionally, right? Which if we're trained at it, we just do that on demand. And then from there, something else will be known, right? A person will call with the answer and they didn't know that they were calling to answer my questions. The right thing will, like the serendipities can flow, or the empowerment or the healing can be had, or the moment of aha insight, like that gamma strike happens through the brain when we're not when we're thinking mundane thoughts and inside of basically the hamster wheel of our normal neurological patterning. I mean, we have a little bit of gamma there, but if we really want a big up level insight, what are we doing to support that? And that does come from that choice, from that remembrance, from stretching our perception of ourselves from beyond just the container of our physical body and into the remembrance of us as a timeless soul on an endless journey, with our light body continuing in all directions. Because as a source of light, we are infinite and going out in every direction. And when we shift in that way, oh, I would also love a really powerful shift that's available is on my website, and it's a free download, and people have astonishing results. Meditators that have been meditating for decades are like, I just had the most powerful meditation of my life,
Mm.
or people that are non-meditators because they struggle and they can't turn off their mind, or but people are having really powerful uh, experiences just as a one time, but then as an ongoing practice. It's a three-step process. It's very easy. Kids can do it. Anybody can do it. And what it allows for is a shift in that perceptual awareness and an embodied experience of the oneness. So that's really helpful when we want to stay in choice. If we know it in our mind, we're torturing ourselves. Oh,
Hmm.
yeah, we're interconnected. But if we know it in our being that we are interconnected, that's when we can actually do something with it. And that's when we change the aperture, the opening of that perceptual awareness and how our brain is working in real time, how our energy body is moving, so that we can be that evolved being in those moments. We can remember, and over time, you just move yourself to exist in that next, layer, or that next possibility, that next construct of consciousness. And then you just continue that progression. And so I want to make sure to mention that. I think that's a huge tool that I want for everyone in the world to know about.
Yeah, it's so funny you brought that up. This whole interview, anytime I'm like, oh yeah, like I want to ask her this, you just like start talking about it. Like you just
Uh-huh.
so
Because there's a field of coherence that we're
yes,
in
like
together.
you are practicing like what you preach for sure. Because I was gonna ask, okay, if someone isn't there yet where they can go and see you in person and hook up, to all of your equipment, what can they do from home? And there you go. So
Yeah.
where do they get that again?
The website is holonexperience.com, HOLON experience.com. And it's just a little, just a little pop-up box. You put in your email and it's sent to you. And that also helps you to stay in touch if you just want to hear more about what we're up to, or some of the discoveries that we're making, or know about like a really low cost workshop. We do things online. I try to offer things for all, kind of like points of view, budget, scale,
Oh,
everything,
nice.
availability, because I really, this is information that everybody should have. It is expensive to come and do our on-site work, but it's not, some of the programs are not as exorbitant, like it
Mhm.
depends if we have the top neuroscientists in the world with all of the super special equipment out versus some of the lighter equipment, which is actually massively transformative. I would say that this field that we consider to be biohacking, for those that are familiar with that term, is actually consciousness assisted technology. Like it's technology that assists consciousness, is how I should say it.
Okay.
Right. And so if you apply it in that way and in the right frame, that's the way that it works is medicine for consciousness. So we have a lot of different programs to suit everybody, but anybody and everybody, please download that and give the three-step process a try in your life and see what happens for you. And know that I would love anybody that wants to send me a quick email through the website or whatever, please do, because I love hearing those stories. It is not easy work to be sitting at this intersection and to be pioneering out into the space, nor is it particularly hard, but it takes the fullness of my devotion and a lot. I pour a lot into it. So I love hearing success stories. If anybody wants to share or questions, right? So that I can further refine the way that I'm communicating. Because essentially, we're taking the world of woo, if we were going to be judgy about it, consciousness, which is like super difficult to describe and explain. And then we're merging it into the nerdiest of neurosciences, which is also very hard to explain. And then grounding it into the practical of how do we be parents? How do we be really efficient, top tier leaders in our fields? Like, how do we do all of these things? And it's actually all the same conversation. So I'm continuously in that place of learning, and I want to have people engage and help to support to move this whole thing forward. So I encourage communication.
Well, I wish we were in person so I could give you a hug because
I
I just
know,
feel
right?
like you're like changing the whole I don't want to say industry, like this whole space, I think you're really changing and you have such a warm presence too, which you don't always see. And, when you're mixing neuroscience and everything else. And I just think you are absolutely 100% aligned with what you came here to do. Like it's so crystal clear. And I'll have my notes out on that website later and like signing up for everything. I'm very excited.
Awesome.
I think this is so great where we're headed and what you're already doing. I mean, you're doing things I didn't even realize we had the capability to do yet. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind acknowledgement. And I've really enjoyed it. And I've enjoyed that coherent field that you were describing. It was a really, I mean, people often say that at the sign off of a podcast, like, oh, but like, no, really, this has been amazing. And thank you for having me on and for a really engaging conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. And for everyone listening, I will link the website in the show notes so they can check it out. And anytime you want to come back on, I feel like we could talk for hours and hours and hours.
Totally.
But I will let you go for now. So thank you so much for coming on. And
Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie.
all right, until next time, thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode.